Welcome to the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast, where we have real conversations about all things homeschooling from a Canadian perspective. I'm your host, Lisa Marie, and in this episode, I'm talking about the brain and neuroplasticity with my special guest, Shelley Woon from Arrowsmith School. So grab your favorite drink and come join us on the couch. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to get to know a little bit more about what you do and how we get our brains working properly. So could you just take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us what you do and why you're interested in this line of work?
Okay. I'm Shelley Woon. I'm head of Arrowsmith School, and we're located in Toronto. This is sort of what we would call the mothership of the Arrowsmith program. It's offered all around the world, but this is the site where Barbara Arrowsmith Young herself frequents throughout the year. And yeah, so I just really wanted to speak with you today and your listeners to just share how we might be able to support families in understanding how their children are learning. And the great thing about our program, it's not as though a brain changes at the age of 18 and suddenly you've acquired everything. So we are also applicable to the adult learner. So yeah, I'm just hoping to shed some light on a different way of thinking about what gets in our way of succeeding and what makes us successful, all related to the brain.
Fantastic. So I know that the word that we used when we were chatting was neuroplasticity. So I have to ask you, what is neuroplasticity?
Yes, what's neuroplasticity? It is the brain's ability to change. There was a time where we didn't acknowledge that the brain actually had the ability to change, that we viewed learners as a fixed black box, that once whatever they had, that was what they have and live with it. But now we know that that's not the case. And Barbara was a pioneer in neuroplasticity, that when she was first making her discoveries, which were initially related to her own self as a learner, that she, spoke about neuroplasticity and that people really questioned, this sounds like it's, is this supposed to be like magic or what? But now many researchers have caught up to Barbara Arrowsmith Young and acknowledged that the brain can change. And when we target certain areas in specific ways, then we can grow the capacity of our brain to think and support us in navigating our world.
Cool. So it sounds like it's not just for, I don't know, whenever you think neuro, I hear the neurodiversity and neurotypical, and those are the words that I often hear of with neuro, but it sounds like this is for everybody, not just kids who have special needs or grown-ups that are struggling with ADHD.
Yep.
Hi, maybe. So It sounds like it's something that can be useful and helpful for everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. That it isn't, like I mentioned a bit ago, it's not as though everyone's brain is suddenly working at full capacity and at its full potential when we reach the age of 18, that we have many adult students within our school are working on independent check-in programs, we call it, where they are working on areas of their brain, cognitive functions that are getting in the way of their ability. And also we have some students who are working at it from an enhancement model. So in Spain right now, there's a number of private schools that have every student in the school working on a different cognitive exercise depending on what grade you're in. You're working on a specific cognitive function to enhance from wherever you currently are.
Fantastic. So as a homeschool mom, are there practical ways that I can do this? I know that you have an amazing program, but I'm sure that you need parents to come alongside to help support and encourage this as well, especially since we're their teachers as well as their parents. Is there ways that we at home are able to help our kids, build that skill with their brain, be able to help them develop and learn and effectively?
Yeah, that I think our programs target specific cognitive functions. So we really look at 19 different cognitive functions, but there are things that we can do every day that really strengthen the cognitive functioning within our brain. So if we're working and persevering through a challenge and then succeeding at that challenge and then making a little bit more difficult, and then mastering it again, that we can our brain is engaged and neurons are firing and wiring and dendrites are growing and expanding our brain's capacity. As a student, like I was someone who struggled to learn to read in elementary school, and then in high school I wasn't highly engaged. And then suddenly I developed an interest in volleyball, and we played systems in volleyball. And it wasn't just setting and bumping, it was that we had to think about where someone was on the court, where people are moving to. I was a setter playing different systems. And my engagement in that, I really believed, supported some wiring within my brain. And not only about being a part of a community changed my engagement level in school, but also I think just activating my brain in a way that was challenging it more and more and pushing my abilities further, that I think, neuroplasticity was occurring then. So yeah, every time we're learning, we're increasing our capacity to learn. But what Barbara's discovered is that there's different parts of different cognitive functions that get in the way. And so they require a more targeted, intentional approach to really advancing that particular cognitive function. I was listening to it was the podcast on learning styles and modalities, and just listening to some of the things that you were describing about yourself as a learner. And there was some talk within there also about central auditory processing. And so if we think about central auditory processing, we can actually break it down further. And so from an Arrowsmith perspective, when we look at central auditory processing, that there's multiple components. So we try to figure out what part is getting in the way. So memory for information, is it your difficulty in retaining information that you hear? Or is someone struggling with what we would call predicative speech cognitive function, where it's about the sequence of the language and comprehending how language parts are put together? Or the symbol relations cognitive function, which is about the processing and the comprehension of what we're taking in and hearing? Or is it the symbolic thinking, which is the essence of language and communication? Or does it have to actually do with the auditory speech discrimination cognitive function, where you're able to distinguish subtle sounds and differences within words? So on the surface, and this is the same thing when there's a reading difficulty, it all looks the same on the surface, but what's underneath, and how do we trace that back to the brain so that we're developing the area that needs developing?
That's amazing, because I never thought about how complex a challenge could be, right? Like, and how many parts of a brain we have to use to do what we consider basic skills, but obviously they're not so easy peasy as they sound on the surface. It's a lot more in depth than you realize, and when you start to dig a little deeper. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
I loved your just thought about how you struggled with some areas in school, and then you found something that was really passionate for you, and it really encouraged you. And I think I was thinking about that as a homeschool mom, about, I could try to drill multiplication questions into my kid, but if they're not enjoying it, there's no way they're going to ever remember. So it's like, how do we as a teacher find things that excite kids so that they are actively interested and engaged and wanting to participate and learn those things? That's a very important part of homeschooling as well, because we have the ability to work with our kids every day and get to know them really well. We don't have 25. Well, most of us don't have 25 kids that we need to to figure out.
Your one guest had 5 children. That's quite a lot to manage at home. So
I've got 5 too. So it's about just that idea of firing the brain in a way that makes them interested, engaging, and willing
Yeah.
to learn things that stretch their brain a little bit more. Because I know that I've got a teenager that struggled with an eating disorder. And
Right.
so what we learned over the years is how food impacts the brain as well. So that's some of the
Mhm.
things we talked about when you're not getting the nutrition that you need, your brain can't pull memory, it can't function well. Like speech is very slowed down because you have to process a lot harder because it doesn't have the nutrition that it needs to go. And it was really interesting for me learning about that and then seeing how that applied to some of my other children with food challenges. Like,
Right.
and so in retrospect, it's like, oh, some of these things are understandable now. It's not just like, oh, they didn't do well in math. It was that they couldn't process their brain to understand what was going on in math. So sometimes I think we are quick to jump to a label. Not that I think labels are wrong, but I think that sometimes we see that as like the first and easier solution. And then as we move a little bit further, we realize that maybe it is more in depth, as you said, with all the different parts and pieces that are involved in our brains and our skills that help us be able to learn and communicate and those kinds of things. So I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. And just what you were saying, a couple of points come up for me. That like there's a significant connection between struggling to learn and compromised mental health or compromised well-being. And so when someone is really struggling day after day after day, it can, wear away at them, and it's a huge draw on the brain. It depletes
Mm,
energy really quickly. And so that we see a lot of individuals who do struggle in other ways, but some of it can be traced back to what's actually happening in their brain and the challenges with that. We want to go beyond the label. So the label is the label, but we want to focus on solutions and really understand where some energy could be targeted to try to change someone's life and give them what they need so that going forward they aren't faced with the drain on the brain. Even
mm,
ADHD, so there's different types of ADHD and different reasons for ADHD. The type that we can help with is if there are some cognitive functions that aren't working to capacity, then your brain isn't as efficient, so you can lose focus easily, or you can get cognitive fatigue because your brain is really all these different functions that, like, just like we said with auditory processing, how many functions I just named.
mm,
Well, reading has even more functions tied to it. So if you're trying to read and you've got, 8 weak cognitive functions occurring in your brain that are needed for reading, then yeah, it will look like disengagement, lack of focus, distraction. I'm going to be drawn to what is easy for me to take in
mm,
and do than persevere with what's going on in the brain. And so like the reason I wanted to speak with you about how we can support homeschooling families is because even though we're called Arrowsmith School, our program doesn't need to be like a school. We have an online offering, we have an independent check-in offering. In that case, often our staff work with the parent, and then the parent supports the child with the particular exercise that they are working on. Or we've had students who are homeschooled and then they just join in for 1 period a day or 2 periods a day, depending on what the family's choice is. The independent check-in model, what's good about it's sort of on your own schedule. I know you were saying that you live on, or your husband works on the farm, and so maybe your holidays are occurring at different times a year, and so the independent check-in allows for greater flexibility with that sort of thing. So yeah, it was us supporting homeschooling families that made us think, oh, well, maybe we should communicate and reach out to more homeschooling families, because we're sure that that other families are struggling. Like my I came here after I retired from 30 years in public education. And so I was a superintendent of special education. And so I am aware of many of the challenges that exist. And I'm aware of some of the challenges where, some families decide they're going to homeschool right from when they are deciding to have children and what they've mapped out. Others, it can be because there's been difficulties, and instead of persevering through the system or navigating a challenging system, they've chosen to homeschool. In the end, they still have a child that they're needing to figure out how to support. And so, yeah, that I love Arrowsmith because it's about solutions, and that's what makes me passionate about it. We're not just putting a label on. We're not just looking for workarounds. We're actually building capacity to empower individuals, adults who are struggling in the workplace. Some of them join us so that they can refine some of their skills, process faster, comprehend more easily, and then apply that in the work setting and succeed. So
again, it's pretty cool that it can be for lots of different people. Okay, so
yeah.
As a homeschool mom, what clues or things should I be looking for to see how kind of things I can need help with? If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, one of the things, because we have a questionnaire on our website that leads you through all sorts of questions about, some are related to life skills, some are related to learning skills, math, all sorts of things. And you can complete the questionnaire, and then we provide you with with results that show one that's based on your own rating, because there's also a part that makes you think about each function. Oh, how do you rate yourself in this? And then it's also a response to compare it to with, based on all of the questions that we asked, where we would see some areas of need are. So that might be a starting point for yourself or for other families, just to see, well, just based on this, I wonder what areas might be getting in the way. And it just drills down. And what's interesting about the cognitive functions is they cross subjects, they cross skills. And so the symbol relations cognitive function may be getting in the way of your ability to read and comprehend, but it also might be getting in the way of solving complex math questions or making connections from one situation to another. That it's that the functions are engaged in many different types of tasks, and so a weakness in one could present as a challenge across many different things. So so on our website is a cognitive questionnaire that families may find interesting to complete.
The neuroplasticity skill sets that you kind of are talking about, is there like subjects at school or subjects that we do in our daily life that it affects or helps the most, or is it all across everything we do?
Yeah, it's really every time we're doing anything. Like I can't even think about how many cognitive functions we're drawing on just engaging in this conversation. If I sat and thought about it, I could probably break it down. But and when you think about how many individuals struggle with learning to read or learning mathematics, it's because there are so many cognitive functions that are engaged. There are some lower level cognitive functions, just the recognition of symbols, being able to distinguish symbols apart, being able to decode words. But then there's the higher level cognitive functions where they are about communication and taking in ideas and remembering them and comprehending or making connections, or remembering something that happened in chapter 2 and now it's referencing it now in chapter 4, making connections between one text and another. So improving one function, and the symbol relations cognitive function is the most significant. It is the most powerful function that's engaged in most of what we do, but some of the other functions are at play as well.
Okay, as a parent, are there some challenges that we may face as we're trying to help our kids develop their brain a little bit more and to sharpen those skills that are potentially weak? Like, what challenges do you see parents struggling with that? And are there any tips you have for helping us overcome those challenges?
Yeah. Like when you think about ADHD, so if it is brain-based ADHD, it can be challenging to engage in something that's going to help develop the functions that are resulting in the presentation of ADHD. And so really trying to figure out ways to keep kids motivated. We work closely with families often when a child has ADHD because we need to work in partnership to figure out, what does your child respond to? What can we do to help them really push through the task? And with our program, the tasks are all really scaffolded. So it's a little bit of a challenge, and then you master it, and then it's the next challenge. And so they really build on one another. So I think if you think about anything that you're trying to do with your child, if you can do something where you are just really breaking it down into the smallest bit and have them experience success with that before moving to the next little bit of challenge. Even like with you were saying about your son, I believe, when you give him a list of things to do and he goes away, but you're going to find him standing in the kitchen doing none of what was on that list. And so really going back to giving one item and trying to look for as many opportunities where you're giving him one item to go and do and come back. And then once it feels like that's going well, then how do we just build upon that? Like that would be engaging his brain in a reality-based way in trying to strengthen the cognitive function.
Well, I guess that kind of answers my next question, which was, is there any like tips that you have for daily habits or daily skills that we can implement just anyways, whether our kids have neurodiversity, whether our kids are neurotypical, whether it's me, like, is there any good, healthy brain daily things that we should be doing?
Yeah, well, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier, that we do need to feed our brain in healthy ways, that it is about we try to look at our brain through a cognitive health framework as well. And so how are we feeding our brain? How much water are we putting into our brain? What strategies are we using to maintain emotional regulation? So am I incorporating mindfulness? Do I have any type of strategy for that? And with some individuals, they need even the support of counseling, external support. Just, our brain, if we think about it, is everywhere we go. It's the most important part of and makes up who we are. Everyone's brain is unique. So, it's going to respond in different ways. So I think if you were to look at our questionnaire and completed it for each of your children, and you might see that, okay, and for yourself, I did one. I've done it a couple of times just to see if I change my thinking about myself over time. Yeah, just trying to understand what's getting in the way, read about what that function involves. Barbara has written a book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. She talks about each of those areas as well within her book. She's been written about by Norman Doidge as well, The Brain That Changes Itself. Joe Bowler, like many other individuals who are interested in neuroplasticity, write about her. So if you can think about these functions and then explore what it is that they are specifically related to, and then there's possibly some activities you can do. Our program targets them specifically, and it doesn't look like a regular program. So what the kids are actually doing isn't what you would see them doing in a traditional school. We do in our school have English and math, but that is a small portion of our day compared to the cognitive programs. And in our day, we go from 7:45 all the way to 8:30 at night, where families can join for 40 minutes a day, however it works for them, or like I said, work independently. So and we're always happy to, if you try the survey and you want to or the questionnaire and want to talk about it more, that we welcome those kind of conversations. And we've been doing some presentations on our learning webinar series on different things like ADHD, executive functioning, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, just trying to understand them more and making the connection between what we usually know about these things and then what it means in terms of cognitive functions.
Do you think that there's an increase in kind of these challenges that we've noticed about? Do you think that in today's society
Yep.
we see them more often, or is it just that we're more aware of them and how our brains work and how people function?
Yeah, like I do feel like it's more prevalent, and I think some of it is that we're noticing it more because there's fewer, like in my world, I'm encountering it more because I'm exposed to students from all around the world that are struggling with learning. And if there's not interventions that are addressing learning, then students are carrying these difficulties for a longer period of time and into adulthood, and they're unresolved. And there's been a real focus on accommodations and lowering of expectations than on addressing the core concern. And so when we did have literacy and numeracy interventions, that some of those interventions were very beneficial for students, and they would have engaged in a bit of a neuroplasticity would be occurring from those interventions. But that isn't typically the approach of most systems now. And the other part is I think, yeah, like when we think about genetics and we think about what happens over time, that it's natural that we're going to see more presence of some of the neurodiversity, autism, like if it's with it being genetically related, that if everyone's carrying a little bit, or some people are carrying a little bit, and then at what point does it surface? And so yeah, if we think about genetics, that I think that's also one of the reasons that we see more. But it is also great that we are talking about it more, so people don't have to carry the stigma that might have been once carried, and in many cases still is carried. But if we can overcome the stigma of having a learning difficulty, then people are talking about it more, and so we're hearing from people that they're struggling. And females are actually very good at masking learning challenges. So because the presentation isn't typically behavioral, that they just sort of slide through systems, workplaces, whatever, under the radar, where often, and not, I don't want to be gender stereotypical, but often it has been a behavioral presentation when there's a challenge with if a male student is struggling. So then resources are channeled there, and so we think that there's more males with learning difficulties than females, but it may just be that because of the way it's presenting, we notice it more often in males than females.
The other question I had is, you've obviously worked with homeschooling families. Is there something that you've noticed has been really beneficial for them as they're trying to figure out how to work with you guys or just implement the practices that you've suggested? I know that homeschoolers, we have the benefit of, as I mentioned, being able to adapt our curriculum and adapt our learning approach and adapt the engagement level as we needed. But is there any other things that you've noticed has been really helpful for homeschoolers, or just any insight you have from your experience working with them?
The fact that the range of our day, and that we do allow flexibility, that if someone does want to have their child attend regularly, then sometimes the students will come for 2 periods on a Monday, but not at all on a Tuesday, because that's when they're going to be doing some community-based activities and engaging with other homeschooling families. And then the other days of the week attend 1 period a day. Our independent check-in model, because it offers the flexibility of people doing it whenever it fits into their schedule. If a family wants, it's just more where we ask people to engage for at least 4 hours a day. That we've had families where they've decided that they do want to come to us for a longer period of time, not just one period. We had a little guy who came for 4 periods, and then he ended up coming for 8 periods because the family wanted to get as much as they could up front while he was little to benefit him for the long run, and then go back to the homeschooling model. Or some of the students do attend for half a day online, and then the other half they're engaged in their homeschooling program. We really like, because we keep a lower student-teacher ratio, we really like to be connected with our families, understand what this looks like in practice. So if we're working on these exercises, what are you seeing at home now? Are you noticing any differences? Or if engagement is a challenge, like I said earlier, working with families to really support them. And because we're like a very unique type of school, that I think in lots of ways, families offering homeschooling can be unique, and whatever the priorities are of the families are included in, like, we sort of fit in many ways because we aren't traditional either in our whole approach. And there are more traditional. We do have students who attend every day for a regular school year, but the majority of our students attend at different times for a different amount, 1 period, 2 periods.
What final piece of advice would you give to a homeschool parent who wants to leverage neuroplasticity to enhance their kids' learning?
Yeah, so I really think that it's worthwhile to really see if you can look at your child through a cognitive lens. And because we do have the questionnaire that can support that, it might just give you some ahas. Oh, I didn't think about it this way. Or and then check out our website. That we have an Arrowsmith school website, but we also have arrowsmith.ca, which has tons of information about neuroplasticity. And if particularly you would find it interesting if you look at the cognitive functioning page, where it does describe all of the functions. It gives a description of what they are, how a difficulty might present, and then what, by enhancing that function, you would benefit. And so I think it's just when we can understand our children more as learners, then it's another step toward being able to support them.
Very good. So then how can my listeners find you? I know you said the website and checking out the questionnaire, and I'll make sure that's listed on the podcast notes. But where else can they connect with you, or if they had questions or wanted to know more about your program?
Yeah, they can reach out to us. We also have our Arrowsmith school website. If you go to the Arrowsmith, the simplest thing is to go to arrowsmith.ca. Tons of information there. If you would like to get in touch with the school directly, you can also click on the school and there'll be some links. But if you wanted to connect with me, it's Shelley, SHELLEY, .woon, WOON, at arrowsmith.ca. And then I would be happy to support or connect you with someone on our team who can walk you through, learn more, figure out how we might be able to help.
Fantastic. Well, I thank you for taking some time to chat with me. It's interesting talking about the brain and how it actually works and how we can change it. Because I guess you can teach an old dog new tricks.
That's right. You can.
Perfect. Well, have a great day.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Lisa. Marie.
Hey.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast. Hope you learned more about the brain, how it works, and how we can engage our kids in learning. In the next episode, I'll be chatting with my co-host Elena, and we're going to be tackling the topic of sneak schooling, how to get some learning in without kids thinking it's school. If you have any feedback, ideas for topics, or people we should try to connect with for interview, please let us know. And don't forget to share with your Canadian homeschooling friends. Thank you so much for joining in. Until next time, happy learning.